Hi, everyone.
Hello again. Ray Franz, page 655, a new chapter of In Search of Christian Freedom, a congregation of free people. In his second paragraph, Ray aggressively got into the real issue for Jehovah's Witnesses, which is, as he sees it, another a repetition of the confrontation or conflict that the disciples of Jesus Christ found themselves in Acts chapter 2, when they, as faithful Jews, were in Jerusalem waiting for Pentecost, and Pentecost came, and then they themselves realized the extent to which they were in hostility towards the religion of their birth, Judaism. And what Ray sees in that reality is a parallel to ex-Jehovah's Witnesses experience. It's summed up in this sentence from page 655. Now they were being called on to repudiate the action of that religious governing body and their own support and complicity in what it had done, and to be baptized in the name of the very one who had been violently eliminated. Yes, they were being called, I think we can say, to repudiate the action of that governing body of Judaism, the Sanhedrin, but what that would mean, I think we have to get into a lively dialogue with Ray about, because even in the next few chapters of Acts you see it didn't mean exactly what it means for Jehovah's Witnesses. For instance, I think we see very plainly in the pages of the first 5 chapters of Acts that the relationship between the governing body of Judaism and the disciples was uneasy and did result in persecution, but it was not like Jehovah's Witnesses who leave the organization.
It wasn't a dead full end, whereas if you speak against the governing body of the Watchtower, you're out. Whereas with them, there was people speaking, they're having alternate points of view about things. So the setup of the Sanhedrin
itself
allowed for there to be different parties or different voices.
Even as a witness, you're aware of that, because you know the Sadducees and the Pharisees disagreed on many points of doctrine, but they were both strongly represented on the governing body of Judaism.
But I have to admit, when I was a witness, I sort of bundled them together. I mean, I was familiar with the phrase, the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection, that's why they're Sadducee. But I still kind of just grouped them all together as just the leaders.
And part of a false religion, that's the connotation of it, when you think that the disciples created Christianity and kind of left Judaism behind.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what the book of Acts shows.
It was completely based on falsehood, but you're forgetting who originated the religion.
So the disciples, after Pentecost, after this, what Ray calls repudiation of the governing body and its actions, they're asking all Jews to repudiate the actions that they were all complicit in, not just the governing body.
Yeah.
But the governing body in the next few chapters of Acts becomes a very active feature in Luke's account of the early growth of Christianity in Jerusalem. They're the people who say to Peter and John when they're under arrest for the events of Acts 3 and 4, "You have filled Jerusalem with your teaching." And they explicitly command them not to go on with this preaching work, but there's no evidence they stopped.
No.
So whatever the governing body of Judaism was trying to do, it ends up being less powerful and less destructive to the cause of Christianity than the present governing body, which is able to paralyze, basically freeze in their position thousands and thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses who are mentally out but unable to speak.
Now, in the case, how could they stop talking about what had just happened? They had killed the Messiah, and they needed the Messiah for their salvation. So I think then it also shows you the focus of the message.
Yeah, the person of Christ and what he has done for all of us, including those unbelieving Jews.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. And so, although they attempt to shut them down, they do not succeed. So the disciples continue to be in Jerusalem, according to Acts chapter 6. Even when a violent persecution breaks out, the disciples are still in Jerusalem, presumably still attending the temple.
Yeah.
That's
still
the
going to
part that's
synagogue.
missing.
Yeah.
They're still being Jews as well as Christians, the first Christians. And that, again, is another aspect of the contrast between the two governing bodies, that, as you know already from the Gospels, at least two members of that governing body, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, are dissenting voices. And then you learn about another one called Gamaliel, who it turns out is the teacher of Saul of Tarsus, Paul the Apostle, a Pharisee, who dissents from the intent of the ones who want to persecute.
Yeah.
And he's the one who says, you don't know if you're actually going to be opposing God.
So there's a lot more dialogue going on.
Freeness of
people.
speech.
Yeah, freedom of speech. Right.
So now Ray goes on and analyzing the response to the question that had been asked by these newly convicted Jews who now believe that Peter's sermon, they have killed the Messiah. They believe that Peter's message is true. And they asked Peter and the other apostles, brothers, what shall we do? And Ray analyzes, the next few pages are spent analyzing what does sacred service to God look like if it's not the Jehovah's Witness version of sacred service. So he says on page 656, if we read the account that follows those words, as well as all the rest of the Christian scriptures, we will find that Christianity is not presented as either a system-oriented or building-oriented way of life and worship, nor is it defined by creeds or law codes. Neither is it centered upon specific activities viewed as specially and distinctly devotional and religious, and therefore as having superior merit before God over other activities not so viewed. It is a way of life that embraces all of life and all of life's activities. In reading the words of God's Son and the writings of his apostles, we find that it is not a matter of belonging to some religious system, practicing certain religious acts at certain times in certain places, but what we are as persons in our daily life that shows whether we are his followers or not. Only because this is true could his apostles say, whatever you are doing, whether you speak or act, do everything in the name of, or as representative of in the Living Bible, the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And that's a direct quote from Colossians 3:17, 23, and 24. He could even say to those then slaves, this is also Colossians, whatever you are doing, put your whole heart into it, as if you were doing it for the Lord and not for men, knowing that there is a master who will give you your heritage as a reward for your service.
I believe that it is because of failure to realize this that many who many who have pulled free from an authoritarian, works-oriented, legalistic religious organization, and there are a number of these, often feel perplexed as to how to look on the matter of service to God in their new state of freedom. Back in 1976, as a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, I was assigned to prepare material on the subject of sacred service, and the resulting Watchtower articles were titled Appreciating the Treasure of Sacred Service and Rendering Sacred Service Night and Day. The material was based largely on a discussion of the significance of the Greek term latruo, translated as to render sacred service in the New World Translation, usually service or worship in other translations. Both articles presented scriptural evidence that sacred service to God is not something restricted to particular activities, such as preaching or meeting attendance, something engaged in during certain separate special times in certain special places or ways, but is all-embracing, something to be lived, service that takes in all of life. It showed that the scriptures speak of sacrifices to God that include not only the fruit of lips, which make public declaration to his name, but also the doing of good and the sharing of things with others. For with such sacrifices, God is well pleased. And he's quoting from Hebrews 13, verses 15 and 16 there.
Typical was this paragraph from that Watchtower of October 1, 1976. This is a direct quote from what Ray wrote. Sacred service, then, is not something that occupies only a portion of our lives. It is not limited to just one activity or a certain number of activities, but it takes in every aspect of our daily living. It can be summed up by these words: keep doing all things as unto Jehovah, whether eating or drinking or doing any other thing. That's the words of 1 Corinthians 10:31. Showing how all-embracing this service should be, the apostle says at Romans 12:1 and 2, I entreat you by the compassions of God, brothers, to present your bodies a sacrifice, living, holy, acceptable to God, a sacred service with your power of reason, and quit being fashioned after this system of things.
Now, he did have a footnote from the verses that we read, part quotes of Hebrews 13, 15, and 16, which were the fruit of the lips, which make public declaration to his name, and the doing of good and sharing of things with others. For such sacrifices God is well pleased. And he says, it may be noted that earlier in verse 10 of Hebrews 13, the writer uses the term latruo, discussing the serving done by offering sacrifices and offerings at the tabernacle or temple, and then contrasts this with the sacrifices of a spiritual kind that Christians offer at a very different altar. So really, one of the things that you don't always know as a witness, that they continue to do both things. Offering sacrifices at the tabernacle and temple, but also offering praise in their speech, right?
Yep, they went right on being Jews by offering their regular Jewish service at the temple and probably at the synagogue too, since that's where they would have gathered with their families and extended families. Because there were dozens of those, by the way, in Jerusalem in those days. So Jewish life would have continued. But yeah, you don't notice that. You think of it as a contrast. It's either or,
right? Spiritual
sacrifices or the other.
But I think the Romans 12 one that you read also shows you that it does encompass all that you do, because it's talking about you presenting yourself as a living sacrifice.
Yeah.
So it's everything you do in life should be a witness, if you like, a demonstration of what you believe. It's your life, and that was really what they've been always told to do in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
That it encompasses how you treat people, how you live.
Yeah, in the next section, Ray goes more deeply into that the sacred service looked at scripturally embraces all of life. But what you would notice if you were a Jehovah's Witness reading that Hebrews 13 passage would be the clause fruit of the lips, which make public declaration. And
you to his name, so you would immediately go to all your badges as a witness.
Your badges, your distinctives, yeah. So next time Ray goes more extensively into the range of sacred service in our daily life, parental responsibilities, husband-wife relationships, neighborliness, as he puts it.
And you're going to do a couple of links, one to the 7 characteristics of the early church.
Based on Acts 2. The 7 characteristics, including the fact that they went right back into the lion's den, that is the temple, and ended up getting arrested there.
Yeah.
And also to the appendix to the door-to-door series, which we know many of you will have seen, but many people never got to the last segment, which was, does Paul, or do any of the apostles in the New Testament, instruct Christians to evangelize, to preach? So that's the 2 links on your screen, the 7 characteristics of Christian community in the book of Acts, chapter 2, and door to door.